Chapter 1. The Fear of the Unknown. Celan was a barren world, its vast expanses of dust and rock seemingly devoid of life. The atmosphere was thin, almost non-existent, and the planet's surface stretched endlessly, an inhospitable landscape of jagged peaks and desolate plains. No one really knew why humans had initially come to Celan in the first place. Some claimed it had been for research. Others speculated it was for the rich mineral deposits buried deep beneath the surface. Either way, Celan had earned a reputation as a place where only the most desperate ventured, and even then, they didn't stay long. The planet's only claim to fame was its isolation, its empty silence that seemed to stretch on forever, broken only by the occasional wind that howled through the crags. Yet, what few people knew was that deep beneath its surface, Celan hid a secret that would soon shake the very core of the human understanding of the universe. On the planet's surface, in one of its farthest corners, there was a small research facility, a station that had been set up to study the planet's geological activity. It had been abandoned for several years when a lone human, Caleb Dre, found himself drawn to its location. Caleb wasn't an explorer by nature, but he had always had a fascination with the strange and unknown. He had worked as a mechanic on various space stations, fixing everything from malfunctioning engines to failing life support systems. But the idea of uncovering something truly mysterious, the idea of finding a piece of the unknown, was something that intrigued him deeply. On the surface, Celan seemed like a lifeless world, but as Caleb moved through its desolate landscape, the feeling that something was lurking, something hidden just beneath the surface, began to grow. The air around him was cold and dry, and the wind carried a strange echo, as if the very planet itself was whispering secrets to him. Caleb didn't believe in superstition, but there was an eerie stillness to the place that unsettled him. He made his way to the research station, his boots kicking up the dry soil as he walked. The station was a structure of rusted metal and decaying panels, its once sleek exterior now scarred by time and the harshness of the planet. Caleb's mind raced with questions as he approached it. Why had the research station been abandoned? What had they found here that made them leave? As he reached the entrance, the door slid open with a faint whir, revealing a dark interior. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The station was eerily still, its corridors dimly lit by the flickering remnants of once functional lights. Dust covered everything, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Caleb's eyes adjusted to the low light as he made his way through the abandoned facility, taking in the scattered papers, the half-empty containers, the signs of a hasty departure. But there was something more, something Caleb couldn't put his finger on. It was as though the station itself had been abandoned in a hurry, as though something had made the scientists and crew leave in a panic. His curiosity deepened, but it was also accompanied by an uneasy feeling that settled in his chest. He continued through the station, his hands brushing over the old equipment, his thoughts racing with possibilities. He had no idea what he was looking for, no idea what kind of discovery he might make, but there was something about the place that called to him. As he moved deeper into the facility, Caleb reached the farthest corridor, where the research team's findings had been documented. This room, unlike the others, wasn't covered in dust. In fact, the equipment here seemed to be untouched, as if someone had been here recently. Caleb's fingers hovered over a control panel, activating a few of the still-functioning systems. The screens flickered to life, revealing images and data that were incomprehensible to the untrained eye. But one image stood out. A small figure, barely visible through a grainy image, caught his attention. It was an alien, no doubt about it. The creature in the image was unlike anything Caleb had ever seen before: small, fragile, with wide, shimmering eyes, and a body that seemed too delicate to survive in the harsh environment of Celan. The image was old, yet the figure looked as if it had only just been captured. Caleb's heart raced as he zoomed in on the image, trying to make sense of it. The alien was standing alone, its back against a rock, its features visible even through the grainy image. Its eyes were wide with what seemed like terror, and it looked trapped. Caleb's thoughts raced. Had the research team discovered this creature before they disappeared? Was this what they had been investigating? Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut behind him, and the room plunged into darkness. Caleb froze, his breath catching in his throat. The screens before him blinked out, and the eerie silence of the station was replaced by a low, rumbling growl. His instincts kicked in, and he reached for the emergency flashlight at his belt. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing shadows flickering in the corners of the room. A sense of dread washed over him, and as he moved toward the door, the growl came again, louder this time, closer. Then, from the corner of the room, something shifted. Caleb's flashlight caught the movement, a tiny, delicate form creeping out from the shadows. The creature in the image. It was real. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as the alien girl stepped into the light, her wide, terrified eyes locking onto his. Her skin was translucent, almost glowing in the dim light, and she was small, no taller than a human child, but her presence felt as if it occupied far more space than it physically did. She looked fragile, her limbs delicate, and her breath came in sharp, quick gasps. It was clear she was afraid, but more than that, there was something in her gaze, something that made Caleb's blood run cold. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other, the weight of the moment heavy between them. The alien girl took a step back, and Caleb instinctively took one forward, his hand reaching out, unsure whether he should approach or not. He had no idea how to communicate with her, what to say, or even if she could understand him. But the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She didn't trust him, and why would she? To her, he was just another human, one of the many who had likely come before him, all of them predators in her eyes. "Hey," Caleb said, his voice soft, trying to bridge the gap between them. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The alien girl's eyes widened, and for a split second, Caleb thought she might understand. But then, without warning, she darted towards the door, moving with incredible speed and agility, her small body vanishing into the shadows before Caleb could react. He cursed under his breath and immediately pursued her, his heart racing. The alien girl was fast, far faster than a human could move, and she seemed to know the station's layout better than he did. Caleb ran through the corridors, every step echoing in the eerie silence. She had to be close. He had to catch her. But the further he went, the more the feeling of being watched crept into his mind. It wasn't just her. Something else was in the station with them. He turned a corner just in time to see her slip into a narrow maintenance shaft, vanishing into the darkness. Caleb stopped at the entrance, catching his breath. There was no way he was going to fit through there, and with the girl gone, the immediate danger of capturing her seemed to fade, at least for the moment. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She was not just some creature to be captured or studied. There was something more, something far deeper about her presence on Celan. She was a link, a key to something larger than he could have imagined. And in that moment, Caleb knew that his life had just taken a turn he wasn't ready for. Caleb stood frozen in the doorway of the maintenance shaft, staring into the inky darkness beyond. The sound of his own breathing was loud in his ears, and his pulse was racing. The alien girl, no older than a child, had vanished into the shadows with the swiftness and grace of a predator, leaving him standing there, uncertain of what to do next. He had followed her, but now she was gone, and the silence of the station pressed in on him, thick and heavy. What did she want? Why had she fled from him? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and unrelenting. Caleb's thoughts raced as he tried to process everything that had happened. His first instinct had been to approach her gently, to offer help, but the fear in her eyes had told him that she wasn't ready to trust him. She couldn't trust him. And who could blame her? Caleb had no idea what kind of creature she was, or what kind of life she had led up until that point. She was an alien, something entirely foreign to everything he had known, and yet, in her eyes, there was something deeply familiar, something almost human. The girl was small, fragile, but there was a fire in her that Caleb couldn't quite place. She was more than just an alien specimen. She was a person. But what did she need? What was her purpose here, and why had the research station's team abandoned it? A strange, unsettling thought entered Caleb's mind. Was she alone? And if so, why? His thoughts were interrupted by a low, guttural growl, coming from the darkness ahead of him. It was the same growl he had heard moments ago, the one that had caused his heart to race in fear, but this time it felt closer. A chill crept up Caleb's spine as he realized that the growl wasn't from the alien girl. No, this sound came from something much larger, something far more dangerous. He wasn't alone in this station. There was something else with him, something that was watching, waiting. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the growl grew louder, reverberating off the walls of the narrow corridor. Caleb's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his belt, his fingers wrapping around the grip. The weapon was standard issue for anyone who might find themselves on a planet like Celan, but Caleb had never imagined he'd need to use it. Still, the situation had escalated beyond anything he'd anticipated. He wasn't just dealing with an alien girl. He was in the presence of something far more dangerous, a predator, one that was clearly territorial and perhaps not as forgiving as the girl had been. Taking a deep breath, Caleb stepped cautiously into the shaft, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness ahead of him. The growl persisted, low and throaty, like the warning of a beast unwilling to let him pass. He could feel the vibrations in the air, the heavy presence of something large and powerful just beyond his reach. Whatever it was close. Very close. He moved slowly, carefully, keeping his steps quiet as he advanced further into the shaft. The narrow passageway stretched ahead, winding its way into the deeper recesses of the station. The walls were cold to the touch, the metal of the structure creaking in the silence. Caleb's heart raced in his chest, his grip tightening on the flashlight. He had no idea what kind of creature he was about to encounter, but the instinct to survive something he'd learned through years of navigating hostile worlds pushed him forward. As Caleb rounded the next corner, the growling stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. His breath caught in his throat. The air had become still, thick with the weight of an impending confrontation. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the dark, trying to make sense of the shadows. And then, just ahead, he saw a shape, a massive, hulking figure, crouched low to the ground, its body blending seamlessly into the darkness. The creature's yellow eyes glowed in the dim light, locked onto him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. Caleb froze. His eyes widened as the creature slowly stood up, towering over him, its form rippling with muscle. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of any Earth predator he had ever encountered. Its body was sleek and powerful, its dark fur covered in strange markings that seemed to shimmer in the low light. But what caught Caleb's attention most were its eyes that were intelligent, predatory, but also deeply calculating. It wasn't just an animal. This was a sentient being, just like the girl. The creature growled again, this time more menacingly, its lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth, its claws clicking against the metal floor. Caleb's heart raced as he tried to assess the situation. The creature was obviously protective of the girl. It had been guarding her, following her, and now it was here, blocking his way. For a long moment, the two stared at each other, neither one moving. The creature didn't seem to want to fight, at least, not yet, but it wasn't backing down either. Caleb knew he had to make a decision fast. If he was going to get past this creature, he had to show it that he wasn't a threat. Slowly, he lowered his weapon, trying to appear less threatening, but every instinct in his body screamed at him to stay alert. He couldn't let his guard down. The creature might be waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "I'm not here to hurt her," Caleb said softly, his voice calm but firm. The creature's eyes flickered slightly, as if it understood his words, but it didn't move. "I just want to help. I'm not your enemy." For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing. Then, to Caleb's surprise, the creature took a step back, its posture shifting from one of aggression to one of cautious curiosity. It didn't turn away, but its growl softened, becoming more of a low, rumbling hum. Caleb hesitated, wondering if he had finally reached some kind of understanding with the beast. The last thing he wanted was to engage in a fight, not with a creature this powerful, not without knowing what it was truly capable of. It was then that he heard the softest sound from behind him, a faint, almost imperceptible rustle. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, his eyes darting to the shadows just beyond the creature. There, in the darkness, stood the alien girl, her eyes wide, her body tense. She had been watching the entire exchange, and now that she saw the creature retreat slightly, she took a tentative step forward. Caleb's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, they shared a silent understanding. She wasn't afraid of the creature now, at least, not in the same way she had been when she first saw him. But the fear in her eyes remained, and that was when Caleb realized the full extent of the situation. The creature wasn't just protecting her from him, it was protecting her from something else. This was no simple wild animal. It was an intelligent being, one who knew exactly what it was doing. The girl and the creature were bound together, linked by something deeper than he could understand. And that connection was powerful enough to change everything. Chapter 2. Unraveling the Mystery. The alien girl stepped forward cautiously, her tiny figure barely visible in the shadow of the massive creature. Despite the fact that the creature had backed away, a low rumble still emanated from its chest, a reminder that it was far from trusting Caleb. But now, there was something different in the air's shift. The girl was not running, not hiding, and that alone seemed to change the dynamic. Caleb could see it in the way she moved, the way she regarded the creature, and then turned her attention back to him. There was a connection between them, something more than just a predator and its prey. The girl wasn't scared of the beast anymore. In fact, it seemed like she was more in control of the situation than he was. Caleb stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. His mind raced with questions. Who was this alien girl? Why was she on Celan? How had she survived here, in a place where even the most advanced technology struggled to thrive? And why did the creature, this powerful, terrifying predator, seem so intent on protecting her? As the girl stepped closer, Caleb took a slow breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had no idea how to communicate with her, let alone understand the full depth of the relationship between her and the creature. But if there was one thing he had learned in his years of travel through the galaxy, it was that people, no matter their species, communicated through more than just words. There was a language in the eyes, in the posture, in the way one being responded to another. And right now, the girl was offering him a silent plea for understanding, a plea he wasn't sure how to answer. Are you? Caleb's voice faltered as he tried to find the right words. He wasn't sure if she would even understand him. Are you okay? The girl hesitated, her large, luminous eyes flickering between Caleb and the creature. She seemed to be weighing her options, and for a moment, Caleb thought she might turn and run again. But then, with an almost imperceptible nod, she looked directly at him, her gaze intense and filled with an unspoken depth. She didn't speak, at least, not in a way that Caleb could understand, but her body language spoke volumes. She wasn't afraid of him. And, in that moment, Caleb realized that this wasn't just about survival for her. It was about something much bigger, something she was trying to convey, something that stretched far beyond her tiny, fragile form. The creature, still standing protectively nearby, lowered its head just slightly. It wasn't a complete gesture of submission, but there was a distinct change in its stance, a shift that made Caleb feel like he had earned some small measure of its trust. The girl and the creature were linked in some unspoken way, and for all Caleb knew, she might have been the one who had tamed the predator, not the other way around. Can you understand me? Caleb asked, his voice softer now, as if he was afraid that raising it might break the fragile trust that had begun to form. The girl's gaze didn't waver, and after a long moment, she finally nodded again. It was a small gesture, but it was enough for Caleb. For the first time since meeting her, he felt a surge of relief. She understood, but the moment of peace was fleeting. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an almost electric energy. Caleb wasn't sure what it was, but something was shifting in the atmosphere. He felt the weight of it, as if the planet itself was waiting, watching, and he knew instinctively that they weren't alone anymore. The jungle, despite its silence, had a presence. And that presence wasn't just the creature they had encountered. Something else was out there, something much bigger and far more dangerous. Before Caleb could react, the ground beneath him trembled. It was subtle at first, just a slight vibration, but then it grew stronger, sending a ripple through the air. The creature's ears flicked in response, its golden eyes snapping to the horizon. The girl, too, seemed to sense it. She stood taller, her posture more alert, her eyes scanning the jungle with an intensity that made Caleb's stomach churn. He didn't need to see it to know that whatever had caused the tremor was coming toward them. Stay close, Caleb said, instinctively taking a protective step toward the girl. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew they were no longer safe. The predator had been guarding her for a reason. The ground shook again, this time more violently, and Caleb's heart raced in his chest. Something huge was approaching. He didn't have to look to know it was something far more terrifying than the creature that had kept watch over them. This wasn't just another predator. This was a force of nature, something ancient and primordial. Before he could react further, a loud roar ripped through the air, echoing across the jungle with the force of a thunderclap. Caleb froze, his blood running cold at the sound. It was a roar unlike anything he had ever heard before, a sound so guttural, so filled with rage, that it made his skin crawl. The ground trembled again, and this time it felt as if the very bones of the planet were shaking. The creature, its body coiled and tense, let out a low growl in response to the roar. The girl looked up at Caleb with wide, terrified eyes, her small form shaking in his presence. She hadn't run this time. She had stayed by his side. But now, even she seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Whatever was coming wasn't something they could face alone. And for the first time, Caleb realized that he wasn't just up against a wild animal. He was up against something far worse. With a sudden movement, the creature turned and bounded into the jungle, disappearing into the shadows faster than Caleb could react. The girl followed it without hesitation, and Caleb, heart pounding, sprinted after them. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a fight for their lives. The planet was alive in ways he couldn't yet understand, and he was about to learn just how deep its secrets went. Chapter 3. The Hunt Begins. The jungle seemed to come alive as Caleb ran, the thick foliage blurring past him in a kaleidoscope of green and brown. The air was thick with the sounds of movement, the rustling of leaves, and the distant crashing of massive creatures. Whatever had caused that roar, the source of the tremors, it was close now, and Caleb could feel its presence like a dark cloud hanging over them. He pushed forward, his feet pounding against the soft earth, but the creature and the girl were already ahead of him, moving with incredible speed and agility through the dense underbrush. Despite the urgency of the situation, there was a part of Caleb that marveled at the creature's grace. It was built for this environment, its body designed for rapid movement, its senses finely attuned to the dangers of the jungle. The girl, small and delicate, moved effortlessly beside the beast, as if she were an extension of it, a companion who knew the jungle as intimately as the creature did. Caleb didn't know what was happening, but the instinct to follow them was overwhelming. He had no choice but to trust the creature now. If it was protecting the girl, then she had to be important more than just important. She was the key to something far larger than Caleb could have imagined. What were they running from? What was the creature guarding her from? Another roar echoed through the jungle, closer now. It was deafening, shaking the very air, and Caleb could feel the ground beneath his feet tremble again. Whatever it was coming toward them. Caleb pushed his legs harder, his body moving on pure instinct, propelled by the need to protect the girl. He knew there was no turning back now. The jungle was alive with the sounds of the hunt, and they were the prey. The ground shook beneath Caleb's feet as he sprinted deeper into the jungle, following the alien girl and the creature. They were far ahead now, darting between trees and underbrush with an agility that left him struggling to keep up. But he was determined. The growls and the roars that had reverberated through the air were no longer distant sounds. They were closer now, vibrating in his bones, a warning, a promise. Whatever it was that was hunting them, it was relentless. Caleb's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed through the thick foliage, branches whipping at his face. The girl and the creature moved like shadows, almost imperceptible in the darkness of the jungle, their presence marked only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the soft hum of the air around them. He didn't know where they were going, but he trusted that they did. They were survivors. The creature had protected the girl from the beginning, and now, as they moved closer to the source of the roaring, Caleb realized that there was something more at play here. This wasn't just a creature protecting a helpless girl. No, the jungle was more than just a place of death. It was a battlefield, and the girl was at the center of it. Suddenly, the creature stopped, and the girl skidded to a halt beside it, both of them turning their heads toward the dense underbrush ahead. Caleb barely had time to react before he saw the source of the sound. Through the trees, a massive figure emerged, a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was enormous, a towering mass of muscle and jagged scales, its eyes glowing a fiery orange. The creature stood like a force of nature, its roar shaking the jungle as it let out a challenge that was met by the growl of the smaller creature. The massive predator, far larger than the one that had been guarding the girl, was clearly an apex hunter, built for war. Its eyes locked onto the smaller creature with a ferocity that was palpable, its muscles rippling as it prepared to pounce. Caleb's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The girl and the creature had been running from this terror. The larger predator was hunting them, and Caleb had no idea why. The girl took a step forward, her small form barely visible beneath the trees, but Caleb stopped her, his hand reaching out to gently grasp her arm. She looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with a silent plea. He didn't know what she wanted, but instinctively, he knew he couldn't let her face this alone. The creature, the one that had been protecting her, stepped forward, its body tense as it faced the massive predator. There was no escape. This wasn't a fight they could outrun. It was a confrontation that would determine the girl's fate and perhaps the fate of this entire planet. Liam's hand shook as he raised his weapon, unsure of what good it would do against a creature that could tear through steel. The girl looked back at him, and in her gaze, there was something that stopped him, something deep and ancient, a recognition that he could not explain. It was a look that told him she knew what was about to happen. She didn't just need saving. She needed someone who could understand her. She needed someone who could see the truth. Then the creature, the larger predator, roared again, stepping forward, its claws extended like knives, its body rippling with deadly intent. The smaller creature growled, stepping into a defensive stance, ready for the fight of its life. The battle was about to begin. With a final, resolute glance at the girl, Caleb stepped forward, his hand gripping the weapon. His instincts screamed at him to protect her, to fight alongside the creature. But the situation was hopeless. He had no training in fighting such a massive, intelligent predator. His only hope was to distract the larger creature long enough for the girl and the smaller creature to escape. Caleb took a deep breath and fired a warning shot into the air. The massive predator paused for a split second, its glowing eyes flickering toward him. But then it lunged with terrifying speed, crashing through the underbrush toward the smaller creature. The fight had begun. Caleb's heart raced as he moved forward, keeping the weapon trained on the larger predator. He fired again, this time hitting the creature in its thick hide. But the shots barely fazed it. The beast turned toward him, its eyes glowing with fury, and Caleb knew that this fight was far from over. Chapter 4: Confrontation and Revelation. As the battle raged before him, Caleb felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The creature he was up against was immense, easily several times larger than the one that had been guarding the girl. It moved with deadly precision, each strike aimed at its smaller opponent with the brutal efficiency of a hunter. Caleb fired another shot, but it did little to slow the larger creature. The fight was happening too fast, too fiercely for him to make any real impact. All he could do was watch in horror as the two predators clashed, their roars shaking the very trees around them. The girl stood frozen beside Caleb, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't running. She wasn't trying to hide. She was watching, observing. And it was then that Caleb realized something. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a test. The girl wasn't helpless. She was waiting for something. The smaller creature, despite its size and strength, was struggling against the massive predator. Its claws scraped against the larger creature's tough hide, but each strike seemed to only anger the beast more. It was clear that the smaller creature wasn't strong enough to defeat it, but it was fierce. It fought with everything it had, never backing down. Caleb watched in awe, understanding now the kind of bond that existed between the girl and the creature. This was a fight for something far more important than survival. It was a fight for purpose. Just as it seemed like the battle would reach its breaking point, something unexpected happened. The girl, her eyes glowing with intensity, stepped forward. She was small, fragile in appearance, but her presence in that moment was undeniable. Her gaze was fixed on the larger creature, and she spoke in a language that Caleb couldn't understand. The words were strange, melodic, like a song carried on the wind. But whatever it was, it had power. The large predator hesitated. For a brief moment, it paused, its glowing eyes locking with the girl's. Caleb held his breath, unsure of what was happening, but then, to his amazement, the creature backed away. The battle had stopped as if time itself had frozen. The girl's voice echoed through the jungle, a soft, haunting command that seemed to carry with it the weight of centuries. The creature turned and retreated into the dense jungle, its massive form vanishing into the shadows from where it came. The girl stepped forward, her tiny figure walking past Caleb toward the retreating predator. For a long moment, Caleb stood frozen, his heart still pounding in his chest. The fight was over. But what had just happened? The girl hadn't just been a witness, she had been the key. Her command had stopped the creature in its tracks, her presence alone enough to halt the war between the beasts. It wasn't just protection that she offered, it was control, a connection to something ancient and powerful. Caleb couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. He had come to Celan expecting to find nothing but a desolate planet. And yet, here he was, standing next to an alien girl with abilities far beyond his understanding, watching her command the very predators of this land. The girl turned to him, her eyes softening. Her gaze wasn't one of fear anymore. It was one of understanding, of trust. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice quiet but steady. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but the words escaped him. He didn't know what to say. He had saved her, yes, but what she had done for him and for the creatures of this planet was beyond anything he could have imagined. There was more to her than he had realized. And in that moment, Caleb understood. This planet wasn't just her home. She was its guardian.